Hi everyone, today I'm going to be taking a look at 1984, which is a cinematic version of George Orwell's dystopic masterpiece. It is a version you can find on Hoopla, along with all the other films that I've reviewed thus far. And I had actually had some difficulty finding this film. I kind of wanted to watch it on my own, so I was pleasantly surprised that it was there on Hoopla for me to watch. So for those of you who are not familiar with 1984, you have John Hurt, who's absolutely sensational, and he is the protagonist, Winston Smith. He is a government employee in the fictional country of Oceania, which is one of three kind of factions that are always perpetually at war with one another. And his occupation is very interesting. It is to kind of forge headlines or fictionalize headlines in such a way that makes the Oceania leadership, their government, look a lot better than they are. And kind of really early on, you begin to see some of his disillusionment. This is a society that expressly denounces intimacy or really pleasure of any kind. They are as totalitarian of a society as it gets. And Winston ends up falling for a woman named Julia, played by Susanna Hamilton, and they kind of engage in an illicit relationship, and they are eventually, of course, they're caught, and they are forced to reform. And I have the word reform in quotes because they are essentially tortured half to death until they no longer believe in what are, I guess, seditious principles, or what Oceania would like to call seditious principles, which is just what a free thinker is, or someone that thinks outside of the box. So that's really a basic synopsis of what the film is, and I just want to start off by saying that I've always sort of had a partiality for dystopic fiction, and this is probably the most seminal work in the entire genre. The difficulty that I have, and I think that many of you might have if you're kind of unfamiliar with the story, which again, I haven't read this book in, I don't know, 15 years, maybe more than that. And the problem that I think that a lot of you will encounter, which I did, was that many of the terms, like ARTSEM, which actually stands for artificial insemination, and then there's another term, INGSOC, which is English socialism. So you're kind of given right off the bat a lot of terms that you might be unfamiliar with, and the film doesn't explicitly define the terms for you. It's certainly handy maybe to have a glossary by you, but even though the film is so nuanced, you never feel like you're lost for too long. It does do a really good job, I think, of piecing everything together for you, but without explicitly saying, for instance, what those definitions are. I don't know how imperative it is for you to refresh yourself with some of the terms, but I think it certainly would be helpful to do. So that's one thing. Again, it doesn't really hold your hand as you're going through the movie, but you're not in a bad place where you can't figure things out. So I said that, again, I think that was definitely kind of a bold choice to just throw us in this very foreign world without venturing to delineate every term. But again, I don't think that when you get to the end of the film, you're going to be going back and wondering, boy, what do those terms mean? Again, the basic premise is that Winston's character is living under this very tyrannical regime, and there's, they have a different term for everything. I loved William Hurt's portrayal of Winston in this film, and I thought that it was particularly affecting. You kind of see the seeds of discontent being planted. He is pro-government in the very opening stages of the film, but you quickly start to see that deteriorates, and he actually keeps a journal handy with him, and that's where you kind of see him. You see the anger and how upset he is. You see that start to grow in the passages as he begins to write them in sequence. There's a really, really troubling torture scene towards the end of the film, which goes on for quite long. So again, this is probably a film that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but this is in an effort to reform Winston. as the government deems him rather bad. And there's this really like veritably painful reaction from William Hurt's character where I almost got the impression that he was actually being tortured. And it goes on for quite a while, so that's kind of uncomfortable. I kind of almost had to look away. I'm rather squeamish when it comes to things like that. There's also a scene where they kind of pull a tooth out from his mouth, which, yeah, there are certain scenes are a little bit troubling to watch, but I think that's really a testament to how good of an actor William Hurt is, because I bought it. I actually thought that he was being tortured. So I thought that was, he's terrific. William Hurt is just a terrific actor, and for any Alien fans out there, I love William Hurt in that, so if you've never seen the original Alien, that's great. So Roger Deakins, interestingly enough, was the cinematographer of this film, so he's largely responsible for the actual visual look of the film. And I know I reviewed prior No Country for Old Men, and I'm not sure that if I discussed Roger Deakins in it. I think he's a wonderful cinematographer. He is also the cinematographer of Skyfall, which is the James Bond film. I'm not sure if many of you guys and girls have seen that yet, but that's another really sensationally shot film. But Roger Deakins really helps to craft this oppressively bleak society through blackness, through colors being muted, and there's always this feeling of this dinginess and this decrepitness, and it's just inescapable. So I think that, from what I was reading, because again, I really don't remember so much of the plot details, but I've heard that this is a very, very faithful representation of what the book was, but because this is now being portrayed in the visual medium, the look of the film is so important. And Roger Deakins is an incredible cinematographer in any film that I've seen him work on. He works in conjunction with the director to really get the feel of the movie. And in this case, this is just this really dingy and really pessimistic outlook of human life. And it's just, he does a great job in getting that visual flair. It does make me want to kind of read the book again, and if you haven't read the book, it is something that I would suggest. In fact, just the premise of this totalitarian state is very intriguing, and one of the recurring themes in the book and in the movie is that you're trying to get people to think less. And what's very emblematic of this is a dictionary that they have, and they continue to revise definitions that are in this dictionary. And you think to yourself, boy, in any typical dictionary, you're going to get an expansion. There's going to be an influx of words. Societies change and culture change. But this dictionary, progressively, they take away terms. And it's just so significant of how this despotic government is trying to get you to think in the way that they want you to think. And they are, they're so pervasive in everyday life that you don't really have time to think on your own. There are these huge television screens that are always projecting the Big Brother, the figure that is Big Brother, and there's always this rousing, patriotic speech that really specifies it really specifies the importance of you just adhering to whatever principles they kind of come up with, and you trusting blindly in the government. So it's really, really an incredibly compelling film from the visual aspect. And this was a film that actually came out in 1984, and I think that it holds up remarkably well. And I think 20, 30 years from now, that aesthetic is still going to hold up remarkably well. There aren't a whole lot of special effects. If there is an occasional special effect, it's practical. Rather than CGI or computer-generated imagery. So it's a film I think that's going to hold up incredibly well over the course of the next few years. And I think in many ways it is so true to the book, and it is really just, it's, I'm glad that I watched it. I guess I'm a little disappointed that it took me so long to get to, and it really does get me interested again, not only in 1984, but it made me realize and remember why I was so fascinated by this topic genre of fiction. I haven't touched a book about any of these sort of fictional tyrannic governments in quite some time, but again, it certainly makes me remember why I had such interest in these books themselves. So this was great, and I would really, really strongly recommend it. So absolutely see it, as long as you're okay with torture. I feel like a lot of the films that I've watched recently have disclaimers about what not to watch if you're opposed to violence or hyperviolence, so I guess I just picked the wrong movies. But maybe romantic comedy one of these days. But as far as 1984 goes, I really, really loved it, and I would strongly recommend it, and John Hurt was just terrific. He's really a terrific, terrific actor, so give it a watch, and thank you for watching the review.